It wasn't long after the start of lockdown. It was sort of the middle of April, an afternoon. I was returning home from having been out for a daily walk with my daughter, my youngest daughter, and I noticed that my car had 2 flat tyres. When I had a closer look, I discovered that one was particularly badly slashed, like somebody had a real go at it. And it was a bit unsettling. I was a bit upset, told my husband. We thought maybe it was someone who was having a bad time during lockdown. And that was certainly a one-off incident. We got the tyre replaced. We fixed the slow puncture on the other tyre. We didn't report it. 3 days later, maybe 4, I noticed that my car had another slashed tyre, the one that had been replaced. And I started to feel really uneasy. And then the next day, I noticed that another tyre had been slashed. That was when I realised that my car was clearly being targeted, and we reported it to the police. My husband bought a security camera so we could watch the car. That was really starting to feel like, what on earth? What is going on here? The next day, I was in our kitchen making dinner, and my husband came rushing in to tell me that the back of our house was on fire, back garden fence, and the trees were on fire. And one of our neighbours had already rung the fire brigade, who got there very quickly. I rang the police. I rang 999. I was convinced that this was linked. The fire brigade put the fire out and left. Nobody from the police ever turned up. I spent most of the next day on the phone to the police because I was so sure, that was not a coincidence, and had multiple conversations with various police operators, and still nobody came. And then at the end of that day, my little girl, my youngest daughter, came running downstairs. She'd spotted out of her bedroom window that the back of the house was on fire again. And we rang for the fire brigade and the police. And this time the police arrived. I remember the senior officer from the fire brigade. He got it immediately. He was like, "What? We were here 2 days ago," whenever it was. And he didn't leave without fitting an arson-proof letterbox. And I remember him talking to the police. The police took statements from us. I remember being slightly puzzled at the time that they didn't take any evidence from the fire scene, and there was no scene of crime officers. Later on, our police engineer installed a panic button and a smoke alarm, an intruder alarm. We had a really, really scared night. My children were all really unsettled and frightened. I was really, really scared, but also sort of puzzled. It was very shocking and very scary. And also the weirdness of it. 2 days later, I was woken up about 6:30 in the morning by a massive crash. I remember the whole of the front of the house felt like it was shaking. And I woke up, I'd sort of jumped out of sleep from the sound and thought, my first thought was, oh my God, he's in. This is it now. They're in the house. He's coming for me. I ran downstairs, and it seemed like sounds like a strange thing to do when you're in that state of fear. But I just remember thinking, if he's in, I don't want him to get to children's bedrooms. I ran downstairs, and it was only when I was sort of downstairs that I realised I might be about to have a sort of confrontation in the hall with somebody. Anyway, my husband and I discovered that a big chunk of brick, sort of like a cinder block, had been thrown through the windows at the front of the house. And the camera that we had bought had recorded the incident. We sort of ran outside and looked to see, the police turned up really quickly and then sort of drove off and found the person, and he was arrested and taken away. The police later told us that he had lighter, fuel and matches in his pockets. I remember the arresting officer saying to me, that wasn't going to be the only thing he did today. I mean, I feel really sick talking about it. Remember the fear and the distress at the time. Anyway, then we had a sort of scary wait over the weekend to find out what was going on. Also, I think, because this was lockdown, the courts were virtual and hadn't quite got the measure of how these virtual courts were working. We discovered on Sunday, we got a call on Sunday to say that this man had been tried in virtual court on Saturday morning and had pled guilty to throwing a brick and had been given an 8-week suspended sentence and was already home. And I just knew instinctively that he was not going to stop. I don't understand how that's happened. I think, I've had my car tyres slashed multiple times.
Yeah.
The back of my property's been set on fire twice, and there's a brick being thrown through my window, and nothing felt safe or resolved. And then 2 days later, on the Tuesday, I heard some crashing at the top of the house. The same person had got access to my roof and was smashing up roof tiles. My little girl was running back and forth asking, "Are you all right? What's going on?" So we called the police again, and I had to sort of, when you go and sit in your room and put your headphones on and watch something or draw something. And anyway, the police arrived, arrested him, took him away. We all gave statements, and nobody told us what was happening. Then again, we went into this period of didn't know what was going on. Nobody was telling us anything. Time passed. And eventually we were contacted and told that this man there'd been another virtual court hearing for another charge of criminal damage, and the guy had been released again.
And how did you feel at this point, Sophie?
I burst into tears. I was really scared and I couldn't understand. It was such a strange mixture, Ayesha, of being really scared and really confused as to the response that I was getting, and also absolutely crystal clear in my mind that this was a campaign by a man who was not going to stop. And I felt like I was going mad. I felt like I was the only person that could see it. And
did you feel like you were sort of being gaslit by the whole system?
Yeah, very much. And every time there was an incident, it would be a different team of police that arrived. And even though we were on this sort of special fast action list, they would arrive not knowing what was going on. They would arrive not knowing that there was a chain of incidents happening in and around my home. And I think that was also a really intense source of fear, which was, I'm really frightened that somebody's going to try and kill me. And I'm really frightened that the police don't seem to understand that this is what is going on here or able to stop him. So by this point, this man was out. He was on bail on condition of not being in my postcode. And then I remember a couple of days later, my husband had to go away for the day for work. And I was absolutely terrified at the prospect of being on my own all day with my daughter. By this point, I had our 3 older children. We'd sent them away to stay with other relatives. Because also it was lockdowns. I was trying to stick to the rules. And I didn't know if it was going to be okay or allowed to drive my youngest daughter 300 miles to my sister's house. So she was still with us. And on that day that my husband was away all day, we basically just drew the curtains, and it was like being under siege. We sat in the kitchen and listened to music and tried to do jigsaws. And I mean, I'm telling you this, just remembering how frightening it was and how sick I felt all day. And I was on absolute hyper alert. By this point, you were on absolute hyper alert. Any sound, I was waiting to hear something crash. I was waiting. It's like, I can't really describe it. Every single fibre of your being is on alert, and you are living in this hyper aware and focused state. And yeah, so we managed to get through the day, and I was afraid to look outside the house. I was afraid to leave the house. I was afraid to be in the house. That thing with this all happening in lockdown, I felt like I was just a sitting duck. I remember at one point I think I went out. I can't remember. I maybe went out to put something in the bins, and I saw a neighbour across the road and said, "Would you just keep an eye on the house? I'm feeling very scared." The next morning, the same neighbour contacted us to say that they had CCTV footage of this man outside our house at 4 o'clock in the morning. This is the guy who was supposed to be on bail and nowhere near my house. And I immediately rang the police. And again, it was a new team. And I remember being told to calm down. They turned up, said, "Calm down." I really was hysterical by then. I really was absolutely hysterical, and for good reason. I'm saying hysterical, and I just want to be really clear that there are moments when that heightened fear and panic and nausea is an entirely rational response to the pressure and the psychological fear that you are enduring. I don't use the word hysterical lightly. We were told by this team, it just took a long time. We just had to sit them down and go through the whole thing all over again, and it took a really long time.
And that in itself must have been very distressing as well, to keep having to sort of tell the whole story again from the start over and over again. That must have been very draining as well, on top of everything else.
It really was. And I just thought, what did he do? What was he preparing? What is about to happen now? And they took a statement and just left us. We spent hours wondering, have they found this man? Is he going to appear outside our house, on our house? That afternoon, we noticed another fire had been started. And again, we did the whole thing again. Fire brigade again, more police again, different police. So different police arrived again, who again didn't know anything of what was going on. There was a big pile of wood where a fire had been set. There was a vodka bottle with what looked like some sort of fuel or accelerant in it. They came, they looked, and they left it all, and they left again. At this point, I took my youngest daughter round to a friend's house and made plans to get her further away as soon as I could. I did not stay the night in my own house that night because I was too frightened to. My husband stayed and was sort of on alert all night for something to happen. Nobody called us. We didn't know where he was. That, I think, was when I wrote a tweet on social media saying, I mean, it was a cry for help. I was like, what do you do? What do you do? What do I do? The police don't seem to be able to do this. CPS don't seem to be able to do anything. Eventually, I got a call from the duty officer at 10 o'clock to say the guy had been picked up and arrested.
Do you think it was your tweet?
I don't know if it was the tweet that got him arrested. I think it was the tweet that what I think is that various people saw the tweet and had conversations behind the scenes with senior members of the Metropolitan Police. And then suddenly it was all bells and whistles. And there were lots of senior police involved trying to solve the case, I suppose. And different police units turned up. Scene of the crime officers turned up, took forensic evidence. I mean, it took hours. This is the other thing, that like all of this, it took hours and hours and hours and hours of our lives. You know, there's on the one hand, there's the like not being able to act for fear and not being able to live your life, but not being able to work, not being able to concentrate. And then also sitting with police in and around your home for hours, either explaining it to them all again from scratch and giving statements again.
It sounds, I mean, Sophie, it's the pain and the horror, it feels unimaginable. It feels beyond horrible. We're so grateful for you telling us about this, and I can, hear in your voice how horrific all of this is and must have been for you and for your husband and for your children and for your friends and for your family. And what happened to him, Sophie?
Well, that was it. He pled guilty to 2 charges of criminal damage, and the police were subsequently unable to bring a stalking and harassment case because they had, in my view, and I think my lawyer, Sophie Naftalin, who's here with us, will speak to this more fully, they had failed to build a case. They'd not understood what was going on. They'd not been able to build it as a stalking case. They'd lost evidence, so the evidence was compromised. The pattern had not been recorded. There'd been breaks in the chain of evidence. There were partial fingerprints they couldn't use.
So you have a situation where a man chooses to make your life hell and victimize you and your family and scare you all to death on multiple occasions, and basically nothing has happened.
He went to prison for a short period for 2 counts of criminal damage, and we got a restraining order eventually. I did not believe that he would stick to the restraining order, and we moved house. And the first time I slept in 9 months was the night that we moved into our new house.
So I'm going to bring in your lawyer now, Sophie Naftalin, from Bhatt Murpphy Solicitors. Sophie Naftalin, just tell us what happened from a legal point of view. My listeners will be absolutely baffled to hear this horrific story, a woman and her family driven to sort of the point of madness through fear, and then they have to leave their homes and their community. How has this happened, Sophie? Tell us from a legal point of view, where has the system clearly got this wrong?
So thank you for having me on today, for having us both on. So I think this case shows really serious failings, both in terms of the frontline policing that Sophie experienced and also the CPS. So in 2012, a law was brought in that criminalised stalking. And that law requires evidence of a course of conduct. A course of conduct has to be at least 2 incidences where something has taken place which causes the victim to fear for their lives or to fear that harm will be caused to them. Now, fundamental in that law is a requirement on the part of frontline police officers to understand that this is a course of conduct, that there's a series of linked incidences. So it requires police officers who attend on the scene to be thinking about the fact that they will need to evidence a course of conduct. And the interesting thing about stalking is quite often something that might appear neutral, for example, someone standing outside a house, could form part of the course of conduct because it as part of that act, it's intending to cause the victim to fear danger and fear for their lives. But that requires frontline police officers to really understand that, so that when they turn up, they're gathering the evidence and they're looking at it through the prism of a stalking investigation. And what happened in Sophie's case is basically that didn't happen. So every time the police turned up, she was required to explain, and she did articulate that in her view this was stalking, but police officers basically just didn't take the appropriate steps. They didn't see it as a stalking charge. So when the incident happened, when the brick was thrown through the window, the perpetrator was arrested, he was taken to the police station, the case was sent to the CPS. And again, we see a failure on the part of the CPS because they also weren't thinking about it in the bigger picture. So he's charged with criminal damage, given a sentence in the lowest court, in the magistrates' court, and that's it. Again, the same thing happens. He's again picked up. He's charged with criminal damage. The CPS lawyer isn't thinking kind of about this as a stalking case, so again it's treated as a criminal damage case in its own right. So it's only after Sophie goes to basically resorts to social media, senior police officers get involved, and she's then being dealt with by senior officers who are seeing it as stalking. The case is referred to there's a department within the Met called the Stalking Threat Assessment Centre. It's identified as stalking. They know what it is. And then at this point, there is an investigation, but by that time, it's too late because all of this evidence from these first incidences have been lost. So in some ways, Sophie, she did get 2 charges. So at least this man was arrested, he was convicted. In many, many cases, that doesn't even happen at all. So what's important about Sophie's case is identifying the fact that these officers didn't link this together. And this isn't just something that Sophie experiences, because in 2017, there was a really damning report by Her Majesty's Inspectorate, which was a joint report into the police and the CPS, and it identified failings almost exactly like what we're seeing in Sophie's case. Police officers failing to identify stalking, police officers failing to link incidents, CPS lawyers also failing to have joined up thinking about this. So that failure was happening in 2017. And we also know that this is a very gendered crime. So stalking is something that often happens before a domestic homicide. It's a big indicator of domestic homicide. And so it's so important that police officers understand this kind of offence. Similarly, we have lots of offences that are brought in to address domestic violence or coercive control, but it's a real pattern that it's much harder to understand. They're offences that are harder to evidence because they require joined up thinking. It's not an assault, it's not a theft.
Yeah, and that this failure to join up the dots and this systemic failure to understand the nature of this crime, particularly the gendered nature of this crime, particularly listening. And again, we're so grateful to Sophie Walker for sharing with us her story, because it's incredibly harrowing, but it does shine a light on how disjointed this is. And for many of our listeners, you know, this is not a kind of an uncommon thing. The Suzy Lamplugh Trust says that 1 in 5 women will be a victim of stalking. There have been many high-profile cases. The Sunday Times' own journalist, Rosamund Urwin, has been subjected to stalking. Emily Maitlis has been subjected to stalking. There are many, many women who go through this. What needs to happen next, Sophie? I'm just conscious of time. I want to come back to Sophie Walker. If you could just tell us quickly, what does the government need to do to tighten this up, and the police and the CPS and the criminal justice system?
Something has to be done whereby frontline officers understand that this is what they're dealing with. So it's common sense. You need to understand these laws in order to be able to evidence them and to know what kind of evidence you need to look for. I also think there could be technological ways of dealing with it. For example, every time the police turn up, if this is a stalking case, there could be some kind of trigger when they're informed that they're attending. They need to be given guidance in terms of what they're looking for and what the story is, so that victims aren't forced to retell the story over and over again, which is also very re-traumatizing for them. But ultimately, it's a matter of implementing the law and for frontline officers to be able to have the understanding that that's what they're dealing with. If they don't understand it, there is no point in having these laws.
Should there be a register, Sophie, Naftalin?
So that's one way of dealing with it, but that's about protecting victims in a different way. This is what we're talking about here is about frontline police officers evidencing cases and protecting victims on the ground.
Sophie Walker, back to you. How have you managed to sort of get your life back together? How are you and your family coping with the aftermath of this now? Yes, you've moved away, but it must still haunt you.
Well, as you'll have been able to tell, I find it very difficult to talk about it. I'm doing so because I feel like I'm one of the lucky ones. You know, as Sophie Naftalin was saying, there are women who have endured this and have not lived to tell the tale. I feel very grateful and glad that I'm still here and that my family is safe. And I really, really hope that something changes. And soon. You know, I don't think that what we are asking for is very much. It's for police to understand what's there for them to use. It's for there to be like processes that work, you know, that really basic stuff, you know, it just the fact that police would come and go on shifts and arrive and it would be different people that didn't know anything about it. Like, why is there not a way for police teams to tell each other what's going on? Why is there not a way for police teams to understand what they're dealing with and talk to each other? And I just hope this makes a difference. I hope I can help in some way the police to figure out a better way of dealing with this.